I signed up for a pottery class to win an argument with a woman who isn't there. That's the truth. The whole embarrassing truth. My name is Russ. I'm 37 and I've been divorced about a year. The argument I signed up to win is older than that. It's already over. I lost it a long time ago, and the woman I was arguing with, my ex-wife Diane, will never know I had it again. She'll never know I sat in my car outside a rec center on a Tuesday night, gripping a steering wheel, rehearsing a point nobody asked me to make. So that's where I came from. A man driving across town to prove something to a ghost. I told myself a cleaner version, of course. I told myself I was going to be the calm, competent adult in a room full of hobbyists, the guy who's done things, paid a mortgage, raised a kid. I figured I'd sit down at the wheel, the clay would do what I told it, and I'd go home with a little bowl and a little proof that I was fine. The wheel humiliated me inside 90 minutes. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me back up. You should understand how a person becomes a function instead of a person, because that's what happened to me, and it happened so slowly I never felt it. I was the provider, the fixer, the one who handled the mortgage refi when rates dropped and we had a 4-day window, the one who got up at 2 in the morning when the water heater died and flooded the garage, the one who managed Diane's mother and her opinions about everything, from the wedding to the wallpaper to the way I parked in their driveway at Christmas. I was good at all of it. That was the problem. Because here's how it goes. You get good at handling things, then handling things becomes the only thing anyone needs from you. Then it becomes the only thing you offer. And one day you realize you can't remember the last time someone asked you a question that wasn't logistics. What you wanted, what you thought, what you'd do with a free Saturday if nobody needed anything fixed and nothing was on fire. I stopped being a guy you could actually know. I became a guy who knew where the spare fuses were. Diane didn't do that to me. I want to be clear about that. I did it to myself, one helpful act at a time, and she just watched it happen across a kitchen table for 14 years. You can love someone and still slowly lose track of them, and I think she lost track of me right around the time I lost track of myself. 2 people in the same house, both holding a map of a person who'd quietly moved out. The pottery thing. I should tell you about the pottery thing, since it's the whole reason any of this exists. Years ago, early on, we were lying in bed on a Sunday with the lights off, doing that thing couples do where they confess the small dumb dreams they never say in daylight. She wanted to learn Italian, I said, half asleep, not really thinking, that I'd always kind of wanted to take a pottery class. A beginner one. The kind where you sit at a wheel and make something out of nothing with your hands. I don't even know where it came from. It was just a quiet little want I'd carried around for years without ever examining it. Diane laughed at that. Not cruelly, which is what people always get wrong about the way a marriage erodes. It's rarely cruel. She just laughed the easy laugh of someone who thought she knew you all the way through, and she said, You'd quit in a week. And I laughed too, because she probably wasn't wrong, and because it was easier to agree than to want something out loud. I never signed up. I filed it away. Right next to the guitar I bought and never learned, the one that lived in the closet untuned for 9 years. Right next to the trip to Portugal we talked about every January and never planned. A whole shelf of small wants, dusty, untouched. The shelved self. That's what I had instead of a personality by the end. The divorce, when it came, didn't come with a villain. I keep waiting to tell people the part where someone cheated, where there's a third party, a betrayal, a clean reason you can point at. There isn't one. It ended in silence. It ended in 2 people sitting in a living room they'd painted together, with nothing left to say that they hadn't already not said for years. She said one thing at the end I haven't been able to put down. She said, I don't know who you are anymore, and I don't think you do either. I wanted to argue. God, I wanted to argue. That's what I'm good at, remember. Handling things, fixing the broken statement, presenting the counterpoint. But I sat there with my mouth open and nothing came out. Because she was right. I didn't know either. I'd misplaced myself somewhere around the second mortgage, and I had no idea where to start looking. So fast forward, a year out, living in a smaller place across town. Half my furniture, half my week with my kid, all of the quiet. It was a Tuesday again, past midnight. I couldn't sleep, which had become a hobby of its own. I was scrolling the rec center website for no reason, looking for nothing, hoping it finds you. Spin classes, tax prep workshops, a watercolor thing for retirees that met on Thursday mornings. And then I saw it. Beginner wheel throwing Tuesdays at 7-8 weeks, Studio B. I sat up in bed. I'd love to tell you it was a beautiful moment of self-discovery. It wasn't. It was spite. It was a 14-year-old laugh, echoing in a dark room you'd quit in a week, Some stubborn, petty, wounded part of me clicked register before the smarter part could talk me out of it. I paid the $40 to a ghost, to prove a dead point to a person who would never, ever find out. I walked in the next Tuesday armored and ironic, ready to be unbothered, ready to be the adult in the room. Studio B is a long room with cement floors and a wall of windows gone dark with night. 6 pottery wheels in 2 rows. The smell of wet earth and something mineral like a basement after rain. And people, confident people. A cluster of 20-somethings in matching aprons they'd clearly bought for this, laughing at something on a phone, already comfortable, already a group. I clocked it in about 4 seconds. I was the oldest man in the room by a decade easily. The instructor was a woman named Priya, brisk, kind, efficient. She had the specific energy of someone who has taught beginners for years and could do it in her sleep and maybe was. She clapped her hands once, said welcome, and started talking about wedging clay, working the air bubbles out before you ever touch the wheel. I stood there in my borrowed apron, feeling exactly as ridiculous as Diane had predicted, which somehow made me angrier and more determined at once. And then I noticed her, the woman across the room. I want to be careful how I tell you this part, because I didn't notice her the way the title of a movie wants me to. I noticed her the way you notice the one other person at a party who's also standing near the wall. There was exactly one other person in that room over 35, and it was her. Similar age to me, give or take. She was setting up her station with this air of grim resolve, and the first thing I actually registered about her, the very first thing, was the mug. A travel mug. Chipped along the rim, the paint worn off in a thumb-shaped patch on one side. She set it down on the corner of her workbench with this small, settled gesture. The way you put down something that belongs there. The way you put down something that comes with you everywhere. I don't know why I noticed it. I just did. She was bad at the clay. I want to be clear, we were all bad, but she was bad in a way I recognized. She fought it. She'd lean in, jaw set, hands wrapped around a lump that was supposed to become a pot, and the lump would wobble and slump and defy her, and you could watch her decide, visibly, not to swear in front of strangers. At one point, a gray thing she'd been working on collapsed sideways, lopsided, sad, a pot that had given up on being a pot halfway through. And she looked at it, this ruined gray lump, and she said, perfectly dry, to absolutely no one, "Okay, Gerald, we'll try this again." I had to stare down at my own clay so I wouldn't laugh out loud at a stranger. Gerald. She'd named it Gerald. Like it was a coworker who kept disappointing her. Like the two of them had history. I don't think she meant for anyone to hear it, and I pretended I hadn't. And I spent the next 20 minutes losing my own battle with my own clay and thinking about it anyway. I didn't talk to her. I want that understood. I came to make a point, not friends, and I held on to that for almost the entire first class. I kept my head down. I followed Priya's instructions to the letter. I centered my clay, or tried to, this thing where you press a lump into the spinning wheel until it sits dead still in the middle, balanced, ready to be opened. I could not do it. Mine wobbled like it had a personal grudge against me specifically. But I kept the performance going, calm, competent. The adult in the room. I told myself I just needed to focus, the way I focused on a refi or a flooded garage, and the clay would eventually yield to a man who knew how to handle things. Then it happened. I finally got something resembling a bowl going. Walls coming up, sort of, this rough, wet shape rising under my fingers, and for 1 second I thought, there it is, that's the proof, that's the bowl I drive home with. And then I pushed a half-inch too hard on one side. The whole thing folded. Just folded in on itself like a wet paper bag, slumped hard to the left, slid off center, and the wheel was still spinning, so it flung clay in a long arc across my apron, my arm, the floor. A gray slap of it landed on my shoe. The bowl was a smear. My great proof was a smear, and I was wearing most of it. A couple of the 20-somethings glanced over. The competent adult performance I'd driven across town to give died right there on the wheel, in front of everybody, in a borrowed apron with clay drying on my shoe. And here's what I did not expect. I looked up, hot-faced, ready to do the man thing where you laugh first so nobody else gets to, and across the room, the woman with the mug had just lost another one. Hers had collapsed at almost the exact same moment as mine. 2 pots down across the studio, 2 disasters, nearly simultaneous. She caught my eye over the wreckage. We both had clay on us. We both had nothing on our wheels but evidence of failure. And she started laughing. So I started laughing. Real laughing, the kind that comes up from somewhere lower than your throat. The kind I genuinely could not tell you the last time I'd done. At our own ruined clay. At ourselves. 2 grown adults flinging mud around a rec center on a Tuesday night. Spectacularly, publicly bad at the one thing we'd shown up to do. The point I came to make just dissolved. I'm not being dramatic. It was there, hard and petty and burning, and then I was laughing with a stranger about a collapsed pot, and it was simply gone. Diane wasn't in that room. She was never in that room. There was just clay and a chipped mug and a woman laughing at her own disaster, and me laughing too. When Priya announced the class was over, I went up and confirmed I'd be back next week. Same time. And I want you to notice something, because I didn't notice it until much later. By the time I signed up to come back, it already wasn't about Diane. I should tell you about my kid, because the kid matters. And because what I didn't understand that first Tuesday was that I'd just signed up to spend 8 weeks living the exact thing my kid was terrified of. Casey's 15. Lives with me half the week, the other half with Diane, the standard sad arithmetic of the whole thing. Casey's a quiet one, watchful, the kind of teenager who feels everything at full volume and shows you about 10% of it on a good day. And Casey can sing. I don't say that the way every parent says it about their kid, I mean it. Casey sings in the shower, every single morning, with the water running, thinking the noise covers it. It doesn't. I've stood in the hallway with a coffee going cold in my hand, just listening to my kid's voice come through the door, this clear, unguarded, genuinely good thing. And the second a floorboard shifts or a door creaks, it stops, cuts off mid-note, like a light switch. Casey would rather die than be caught doing it. There's a spring musical at the high school. Auditions coming up in a few weeks. The sign-up sheet's been sitting somewhere at the bottom of Casey's backpack, and every time I bring it up, even gently, even sideways while we're doing dishes, I get the same wall. I'm not doing it. You've got a good voice, Case. I'd just be bad. Everyone would see. Everyone would see. That's the whole fear right there, in 4 words. Not the singing, the being seen, the risk of standing in front of a room and being not good enough where people can watch it happen to you in real time. And I sat there at my own kitchen table and nodded like a dad and said something useless about how you never really know until you try, and I had no idea, none, that I'd just driven home from a rec center with clay on my shoe from doing the precise thing my kid couldn't bring themselves to do. So that's where I'll leave the first part. A humiliated 37-year-old man, divorced about a year, who came to a pottery class to win an argument with a woman who wasn't there, who failed in front of everyone, and who then drove home and quietly, without quite admitting it to himself, decided to come back next Tuesday and be bad all over again. I couldn't have told you why. If you'd stopped me in that parking lot and asked me straight, I'd have given you the spite answer, the Diane answer, and it would have been a lie I didn't even know was a lie. The truth was sitting one room over from me, drying clay onto a chipped travel mug, and I was about to spend the next 7 Tuesdays of my life slowly figuring out her name. It turns out you can figure out someone's name very slowly if you're committed to being a coward about it. By the 3rd week I knew the shape of her hands before I knew what to call her, not the right order, but mine. The Tuesdays settled into a rhythm. Studio B at 7. The same parking spot near the dumpster, because I'm a man of small, unbreakable habits. Wet clay and that rec center coffee that tastes like a carafe somebody forgot in 1998. I'd push through the door and the smell would hit, earth and damp and something faintly burnt, and some part of my chest would loosen a notch before I'd taken my coat off. I looked forward to it. I won't dress that up, in a way I wouldn't have said out loud to a single living person, least of all myself. If you'd asked me, I'd have told you it was a class, a thing on a calendar, a point I was still making. We were the worst 2 people in that room, comfortably the worst. The 20-somethings had figured it out somewhere around week 2. You'd watch them slap a lump down, lean in, and the clay would just sit, center clean on the first pull, dead still like it had been waiting its whole life to obey them. Then they'd open it up smooth and walk a wall straight up and have a real bowl inside 10 minutes. Easy, annoying. Me and the woman did not do that. We fought it. We slumped with our jaws set, hands around lumps that had clearly decided to ruin our evenings on purpose, and we lost over and over at roughly the same time. We never planned it. It just happened by the simple gravity of being the 2 bad ones in a room of good ones. A team of 2, built entirely out of failure. You drift toward the person who's drowning at your exact depth. Her name landed on a Thursday in my head and a Tuesday out loud. Priya was doing the rounds, checking everybody's pull, and she stopped behind the woman's wheel and said, "Nadia, you're choking it. Loosen the grip." Nadia. That was the whole reveal. No music, no slow motion. An instructor telling a grown woman she was strangling her clay. Nadia let out a breath through her nose, loosened her hands, and the pot fell over anyway. And she looked down at this fresh disaster and said, "Flat as a table, of course." I filed the name away like contraband, Nadia. I'd spent 2.5 weeks calling her, privately, the woman with the mug. Now she had edges. She named her pots. That was the thing that got me first. Every collapse, every lopsided ruin, she gave it a name like it was a difficult relative. Gerald was the first, the gray one from week 1. Then came a squat, lumpy, sad little mug with one wall thicker than the other, and she looked at it a long second and christened it Trevor. Just Trevor. With this weary affection, like Trevor had a job he wasn't great at and a wife who'd given up on him. And then, week 4, she produced a bowl so architecturally wrong it defied a human name. It listed a lip on one side and none on the other. It looked like it had been made during an earthquake by someone underwater. She set it down, considered it, and said, "I'm not naming this one. This one's just the situation." I laughed so hard I knocked my own water cup over. So I started doing it too. Badly, copying her, picking up her words like you do from a funnier friend. By week 4 I had a mug I called the defendant because the handle had broken off and it looked guilty, and she laughed, a real one, and something dumb and warm went off in my chest like a flashbulb. It became ours, a whole private language built out of clay we'd ruined. I remember the first time I centered a lump and it actually held. Week 3 maybe, end of the night. I'd pressed it down the way Priya kept showing us, both hands cupped, leaning the weight from my shoulders, not my fingers, and the wobble just stopped. The clay sat dead still, spinning so smooth it looked frozen. Centered for the first time in my life. I went completely still. I didn't breathe. I sat hunched over a spinning piece of mud like a man who'd just cut the right wire on a bomb, terrified that any movement, any exhale, any thought too loud would knock it off. And 2 wheels down, without looking up from her own wreck, Nadia said, "Don't breathe on it." I didn't laugh. I couldn't. I was holding the whole universe steady. "How long do I just sit here?" I said, barely moving my mouth. "Forever, if you have to." She still didn't look over. That's the job. You sit with the thing and you don't flinch. And then I shifted my weight a half inch to glance at her, and the clay went sideways off the wheel. "Oh no," she said. I flinched. You flinched, and we both lost it. Best thing that had happened to me in about a year. Every week when the class ended and the 20-somethings peeled off their aprons and filed out into whatever 20-somethings do on a Tuesday night, Nadia stayed. Priya never asked anyone to. She'd just say, "Good work, see you next week," and start gathering her things. But Nadia would carry that chipped travel mug to the sink, set it on the edge, and start wiping down the wheels, all 6 of them. Reclaiming the dried clay, scraping the splatter off the splash pans, leaving the room better than she found it. Nobody asked her to do that, she just did. So I started staying too. I told myself it was politeness. The decent thing. A man raised right doesn't let one person clean up after a whole room. That was the story I ran, and it was a lie with a true coat of paint on it. I stayed because she stayed. I'd grab a sponge and take the far row, and we'd work, the 2 of us, in a quiet rec center with the windows gone black and the water running in the sink. And we'd talk. Not about our lives. That's the strange part. 15-20 minutes a week, side by side over running water and clay slip, and we talked almost entirely about the clay. How I kept choking my pulls. Whether Trevor could be salvaged or folded back into the bucket and reborn. Priya's theory that you have to ruin 100 pots before you make one good one. We talked about the exact moment a wall gets too thin and gives up. And somehow it was the most honest I'd been with another human in years. The competence I wore everywhere else, the fixer thing, the guy who handles it thing, it was gone. Stripped off at the door. I couldn't pretend to be good at this. The evidence was drying on my shoe every week, and neither could she. 2 people with no masks left, talking about clay, which turned out to be a way of telling each other things that had nothing to do with clay. I should mention Marco, because I got him completely wrong, and it cost me something I didn't know I was spending. Marco was 23, loud in the easy way I might have been once before I traded it for a mortgage. And infuriatingly good at the wheel. He'd center clay one-handed while telling a story, and he orbited Nadia. That's the only word for it. Always drifting over to her station, leaning over her shoulder, hands near her hand, saying, "Here, like this, you're choking it." I watched that week after week and drew the obvious line between the dots. They're together. Has to be. The good-looking young guy who can't stay away, the way he hovers, the way she lets him. I filed her undertaken and I shut a small door I hadn't known was open. I didn't decide to. It wasn't a thought I had on purpose. I just felt myself pull back a single degree, the way you ease off a road you've realized is somebody's driveway. Polite and automatic, and wrong. And here's the part I only learned later, the part that makes me want to shake myself by the apron. She was misreading me at the exact same time. Nadia, I'd find out, looked at me across those weeks and saw a man who was careful, distant, friendly enough but walled off. She clocked the tan line that hadn't fully faded, the ghost of a wedding ring still printed on my skin like a watermark, and she did her own math and got her own wrong answer. A guy passing time, killing a Tuesday, some combination of not really that added up to leave him alone. So she gave me room she didn't want to give, two people stepping back to make space for a relationship the other wasn't in. You couldn't have engineered a stupider situation if you tried. Meanwhile, home was its own quiet war. The audition sheet was due Friday. I knew this because Casey had mentioned it exactly once, in the flat voice of someone reporting a death and then refused to discuss it again. But I could hear the practicing. Every morning, the shower running that clear, unguarded voice through the door, working a song I didn't recognize, going back over the hard part again and again. My kid was rehearsing for an audition my kid swore wasn't happening. And then a floorboard would shift, and it would cut off mid-phrase. Dead, like always. One night over dishes, I tried again, the dad thing. You should just go for it, I said. What's the worst that happens? The second it left my mouth, I heard how empty it was. Every hollow thing a parent has ever said while drying a plate. You don't get it, Casey said. I might get it more than you think. Says the guy who's never been bad at anything in his life. And I didn't correct it. That's the part I keep coming back to. I had the perfect, true, ridiculous thing to say sitting right there. Clay drying on a shoe in the other room. A month as the worst student in Studio B. Living proof that the dad in the kitchen could be bad at something on purpose and keep showing up anyway. And I said nothing. I let Casey believe I was the guy who'd never failed, because admitting otherwise meant explaining where I went on Tuesdays. The line sat in me all week. Says the guy who's never been bad at anything. I carried it to work and to the wheel. I sat down in Studio B the next Tuesday, with my kid's voice in my head, more aware than ever of exactly how bad I was at the thing I'd come to do. And that Tuesday, Nadia was off. I noticed before I could have told you how. She came in late, which she never did. No good evening to the room. The chipped mug went down on the bench, and she didn't touch it once all night. And that was wrong, because that mug was practically attached to her hand. She fought the clay harder than I'd ever seen, not the usual rueful loo, but something with heat in it. Jaw tight. Shoulders up around her ears. She ruined 3 pots in a row and didn't name a single one. I noticed all of it, and I said nothing, because what do you say? We talked about Clay. That was the deal, the safe shared country we lived in. You don't cross a border like that uninvited. But I stayed after. Of course I did. The 20-somethings cleared out. Priya gathered her bag, and I picked up a sponge and started on the far wheels like always, and Nadia carried that untouched mug to the sink, and the water came on. For a long while, neither of us said anything real, just the water running. The scrape of clay off a splash pan. I watched her out of the corner of my eye scrub the same wheel longer than it needed, like she was trying to take the finish off it. You're scrubbing the finish off that one, I said. Maybe I want it gone. She opened her mouth like there was a second sentence behind it. Then she let it go and kept scrubbing. I didn't push. The old me, the fixer, wanted to, the way the fixer always has a solution ready so nobody has to sit in a problem. But I'd been losing to Clay for a month. Some things you can't fix by pressing harder, so I let the quiet be. I scrubbed my row. I let her have the room. And then she talked. She didn't look at me. Eyes on the wheel, hands moving, which I understand now is the only way some things can be said. Over running water, sideways, to a wheel instead of a face. You want to know why I'm here, she said. It wasn't a question. I figured everybody's got a reason. Why a grown woman signs up for beginner pottery and is worse at it than children. She didn't look up. You really want to know? I do. I spent 11 years married, she said. 11 years being somebody's wife. Somebody's idea of fine, that was the whole job. Be fine, be easy, don't have edges. She wrung the sponge out hard. And when it ended, I sat in this empty apartment and realized I had no idea what I actually liked. None of it. None of it. I'd been so busy being agreeable I never found out what I'd choose if nobody was watching. The water ran, so now I sign up for things. Beginner everything. A language app at midnight. A cooking class I quit. A drawing thing. Trying to find out. Trying to meet the person I'd be if I'd ever gotten a vote. I didn't move. I couldn't have. And the pottery, she said, and here her voice did something, got quieter and harder at once. The pottery's specific. I signed up for the pottery because of one thing he said to me near the end. She finally stopped scrubbing. He told me I had no hands for anything delicate. She said it lightly. That was the worst part. A thing she'd practiced saying lightly so it couldn't get her anymore. No hands for anything delicate, I repeated. His exact words. So you signed up to prove him wrong. I signed up to find out if he was right. And it got me, right in the chest, because I knew that exact thing wearing a different coat. Someone had just handed me back my own life and I hadn't recognized it. She'd paid $40 to spite a ghost. Same as me, the exact same. Her story and mine were the same story. We just walked into the same room from two different ruined houses. And I heard myself say a thing I had not until that second admitted to myself. I stopped coming for her weeks ago, I said. Nadia went still at the sink. Coming for who? My ex-wife. I signed up to prove something to her, I said. She laughed at me once years ago about wanting to do this. Said I'd quit in a week. So you came to win, Nadia said. To prove a dead point to a woman who'll never know I made it. The water ran over my hands. But I stopped coming for her a while back. I just didn't say it. Then why do you keep coming? I made myself keep going because if I stopped I'd never get the rest out. This hour, this room, I looked at her. I come for you. She didn't move for a second. Then, quiet, not deflecting for once, she said, you don't even know my last name. No. Good. She turned the water off. Neither of us gets to hide behind being strangers anymore then. The quiet after that was enormous, the kind that has a pulse in it. We stood in a dripping rec center at 8:30 on a Tuesday, and the whole easy thing we'd built, the safe, joking team of two, the country where we only talked about clay just dissolved, the way my bowl dissolved that first night. No going back to it. I drove home that night with my hands not quite steady on the wheel, and it had nothing to do with the cold. Whatever had been sitting one room over from me since the first Tuesday had a name now, and so did the thing in my chest, and I knew, the way you know a wall is gone the second you walk into the space where it used to be, that this had stopped being safe. There were 4 Tuesdays left. 4. And I had just discovered, far too late to do anything sensible about it, exactly how much I had to lose. 4 Tuesdays goes fast when you've finally got something to lose. Weeks 5, 6, 7. They blur in my memory now, all warm, light, and wet clay, the way good stretches of your life tend to blur while the bad ones come back in high definition. But I remember the texture of them. I remember the walls being down. Something had changed at that sink, the night she told me about the 11 years and the hands for nothing delicate. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't have to. It just sat under everything after that, the way bass sits under a song you can't quite hear but absolutely feel in your chest. The banter kept up, the named pots, the bad jokes, Trevor's many descendants, but it had weight under it now, a second floor under the first one. I started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way her hand would linger when she passed me a trimming tool, half a second too long, fingers brushing fingers across a wet sponge, both of us pretending it was logistics. The way she'd lean 2 wheels over to look at what I was wrecking. We were terrible at it, both of us. 2 adults who'd forgotten how this part went, fumbling it as badly as we fumbled the clay. And the walk to the parking lot. That one I remember best. It got slower every single week. The first few Tuesdays we'd file out separately, her to her car, me to mine by the dumpster, a wave and a steep. Weeks by 6 we were walking out together without deciding to, and the walk took longer than the walk should take. We'd stop under the one working lamppost in that lot and just keep talking. About nothing, mostly. Priya's 100 bad pots theory. Whether the situation deserved a sequel. Neither of us named it, not once. But I'd sit in my cold car afterward and watch her taillights pull out and feel the clock in my chest like a second heartbeat. 4 Tuesdays. Then 3. Then 2. Whatever this was, it had a meter running, and we both knew it, and we both kept feeding it quarters and looking the other way. I have to tell you about Marco, because I finally got him right, and getting him right nearly knocked me off my stool. It was week 5. Marco was doing his thing, orbiting, drifting over to Nadia's wheel mid-pull to lean in and tell her she was choking it, and she snapped at him. Not mean, but sharp. I can ruin my own pot, thank you. I'm just saying, Aunt Nadia, you grip it like it owes you money. And the whole room kept moving and I went completely still. Aunt? I sat there with my hands in a lump of cold clay and replayed it. Aunt Nadia. I must have looked like I'd been unplugged because Nadia caught my face from 2 wheels over. What? She said. He called you Aunt Nadia. Because I'm his aunt. She said it slow, like I'd asked what color the sky was. My sister's kid. She made me drag him along for moral support and now he's better at this than me. Which was supposed to be mine, by the way. She flicked clay off her thumb. It's deeply insulting. I think about it constantly. And I laughed. I laughed too hard, way too hard. A bark of it, then more, the kind that doesn't quite match the size of the joke. Marco grinned, pleased to be the cause of something. Priya glanced over. I couldn't stop. It wasn't the line was fine. It was the relief. Pure, stupid, full-body relief, coming out the only door it could find. Her nephew. He was her nephew. The good-looking kid who couldn't stay away from her wheel was a teenager fulfilling a family obligation, and I had spent 4 weeks closing a door I'd had no reason to close. Nadia watched me laugh, and I watched her watch me, and I saw something move behind her eyes. A recalculation. The slow, visible work of someone redoing a sum they'd been confident about. Because she'd had me filed too, I knew that now. A man passing time, killing a Tuesday. The faded ring, the careful distance, all of it adding up to leave him alone. And here was same Gerald falling off his stool with relief because her nephew wasn't her boyfriend. You can't laugh like that about a stranger. You can only laugh like that about someone whose answer to a question you've been afraid to ask just turned out to be the one you wanted. She knew it. I knew she knew it. And for 1 second across a rec center studio, neither of us pretended we didn't. Then Priya clapped her hands and ruined it, which is what Priya was for. The clock got louder the very next week. It was the end of class, week 7, second to last. Priya was doing her wrap-up, and instead of just saying see you next time, she stayed standing at the front and got a little ceremonial about it. So next week's our last session, she said, and we do a showcase. A what? End of term. We set up the long table in the lobby. Everybody picks one finished piece, one you're proud of, and we put them out on display. Coffee, a few snacks, families welcome to come. She smiled like this was good news. It's nice. People bring their kids. You get to see what 8 weeks turned into. Display. I felt it the second she said the word. The old armor. Coming back up my spine one vertebra at a time, automatic like a reflex you can't talk down. Display. One finished piece out on a table, in a lobby, where people walk past and look and form opinions with their faces. I looked across at Nadia to share the joke of it, the absurdity, 2 of the worst potters alive being invited to exhibit. She wasn't smiling. She was looking at her own hands. I drove home that night, and the thing I kept snagging on wasn't the showcase. It was something underneath it that I hadn't let myself look at until Priya put a deadline on it. This had all been easy because the class held it. It's the thing I finally understood, gripping the wheel on the dark drive home. Everything good with Nadia had happened inside Studio B, inside the Tuesdays. Inside the wheels and the shared task and the running water at the sink, we had a place, a reason. A frame around us that did all the heavy lifting so we never had to. But the frame had 8 weeks of life in it, and 7 were gone. What happens when there's no Studio B to meet in? No 7 o'clock, no clay to talk about instead of ourselves. Does a thing like this survive daylight? Does it survive without the scaffolding holding it up? Or does it just slump sideways and slide off center the second you stop spinning the wheel? I didn't know. That was the honest answer that scared me. I genuinely did not know how to be with someone as just myself, because I'd spent 14 years being a function instead of a person and another year being nobody at all. I'd buried the actual me so deep and so long ago, I wasn't sure he'd come up if I dug. Take away the class, the task, the helpful thing to do with my hands, and what was left to offer her. A guy who knew where the spare fuses were. That's the country I was lost in when Nadia made her move. Her retreat, I mean, because she got there first. It was the next Tuesday. The last regular session. We were cleaning up after, the 2 of us, the way we always did. Sponges and the running sink and the windows gone black. And she said it too casually. I knew it was rehearsed because it came out so light. I might skip the showcase, actually. I kept scrubbing. Yeah? I don't have anything worth putting out. She wrung the sponge. My stuff's all bad, you've seen it. Gerald, Trevor, the situation. I can't put the situation on a table next to those kids' work and stand there while people look at it. And I heard it. God, I heard it so clearly it was almost loud. Because I'd heard it twice already that month in 2 other voices. I'd just be bad. Everyone would see. That was Casey. Word for word, near enough. My 15-year-old at the kitchen sink, refusing the audition. And here it was again, out of a grown woman's mouth at a different sink. Dressed up in adult clothes, but the same animal underneath. The exact same move. And I knew the move from the inside, didn't I? I'd made it for 20 years, the guitar in the closet. The trip we never planned, the pottery class I let a laugh talk me out of. Every shelved one I'd ever had was the same single decision made over and over. Choosing not to be seen failing, over the risk of being seen at all. That was the whole thing. That was what linked the 3 of us, the kid and the woman and the man, all making the identical bet in the dark, all deciding the safest thing you can be is invisible. You can't fail at something nobody watched you try. I understood her completely in that second. I could have reached right across the gap and met her there, because I was standing in the exact same spot. So obviously I did the wrong thing. She set the sponge down and turned the water off, and the room went quiet in that enormous way it had started going quiet between us. And she looked at me, half a smile, the deflecting kind, and she said it. It's not a big deal, right? If I skip it. She was reaching for something. I could feel her reaching. It's just a table of pots. You'd barely notice I wasn't there. This was the moment, and I want to be honest about how I failed it. Because every cell in me wanted to make it easy for her. That's the fixer. See? That's the thing 14 years built. Someone hands you a problem and you make it smaller, you smooth it. You say, of course, no big deal, don't worry about it, and you watch their shoulders come down and you feel useful and you've solved nothing. I had the magic words right there. It's fine, skip it, no big deal. I could have handed them over and she'd have looked relieved, and we both would have gone home lighter and a little more lost. The truth was a different sentence entirely. The truth was that it would matter to me, enormously. That the thought of standing at that table next week with a gap where she should be made my chest go tight. That I wanted her there more than I'd wanted anything in a year, and that I needed her to know it out loud in words, with no clay to hide behind. I had the truth, and I had the easy thing, and they were standing in two different rooms, and I was too much of a coward to walk into the right one. So I said, yeah, it's no big deal. I watched my own mouth do it. I heard the fixer's voice come out warm and reasonable and completely false. And something passed over her face, fast, there and gone, maybe. Or just a door clicking shut. She'd reached, and I'd handed her the safe answer instead of the true one, and she put it in her pocket and picked up her mug. Right, she said, see you. Or not, I guess. And she left. I stood alone in Studio B with a sponge in my hand and the sink dripping and the worst feeling I'd had since the divorce. I'd done it again. I'd been handed a chance to be a person, and I'd been a function instead. Smoothed it, made it easy. Disappeared myself right when it counted. I drove home so angry at myself I missed my turn twice. The house was dark when I got in. Casey was supposed to be asleep. Casey was not asleep. Casey was standing in the kitchen, in the light over the stove, holding a bowl. My bowl, one of the bad ones, a genuinely terrible early one, wall thick on one side and caving on the other, a thumbprint dent in the rim I'd never bothered to fix. I'd brought a few home over the weeks and shoved them in the back of a cabinet like contraband, and somehow this one had migrated out onto the counter, and now my 15-year-old was holding it up to the stove light and turning it slowly, frowning, the way you study something that doesn't add up. We looked at each other. Whose is this? Casey said. There it was, the door I'd been keeping shut all month, swinging open in my own kitchen at 11 at night. Mine, I said. Casey's face did about 4 things yours. I've been taking a pottery class, Tuesday nights at the rec center. The words felt strange out loud, in this house, to this kid. 8 weeks, it's almost over. You make pottery. I make extremely bad pottery. Casey turned the bowl again, studied the caved wall, the dented rim, the lopsided base that wouldn't sit flat, and I watched my kid arrive slowly at the math of it. Wait, Casey said, this is really bad. I know. Like, this is bad. This looks like a kindergartner made it. A kindergartner with worse hands than you'd hope. Yeah. And you've been doing it for 2 months. Casey set the bowl down on the counter, careful, like it might be a trick. You've been going every week. For 2 months. And this is the best you've got? This isn't even the worst I've got. And here's the thing my kid couldn't get past. The thing that cracked something open, right there over the stove. You're actually bad at it, Casey said, slow and disbelieving, like genuinely bad, and you keep going? Because that was the part that broke the model. In Casey's whole 15 years of knowing me, I was the dad who handled it. The one who fixed the thing and paid the thing and knew the thing. The guy who, in Casey's exact words a few weeks back, had never been bad at anything in his life. And now here was hard ceramic evidence that the dad had been bad at something, publicly, on purpose, in a room full of people who could watch, every Tuesday for 2 months, and had driven home and signed up to go be bad again. Yeah, I said, I keep going. Why? Casey said, and it wasn't a teenager's why, the throwaway kind, it was real. My kid actually wanted to know, why would you keep doing something you're that bad at, where people can see? And I'm telling you, I had spent the whole drive home being a coward at one sink. I was not going to be a coward twice in one night in my own kitchen. So I told the truth. No lecture, no lesson, no big speech about trying your best. Just the thing, the real thing, the most honest answer I'd given anybody in a year. Because I spent a really long time, I said, only ever doing things I was already good at, things I knew I'd win. And you know what it got me? Casey waited. It turned me into nobody. Your mom said it the day she left. She said she didn't know who I was anymore and didn't think I did either. And she was right, Case. She was completely right. I'd gotten so scared of being bad at anything that I stopped being anything at all. The kitchen was very quiet. The bowl sat between us on the counter, lopsided and dented and honest. So I go, I said. And I'm terrible. And I sit there and I'm the worst one in the room, and it's the most like myself I've felt in years. Casey didn't say anything, just looked at the bowl, then at me, then back at the bowl. I didn't push it, that's important. I want you to know I didn't push. I didn't say, and that's why you should do the audition. I didn't connect the dots out loud or turn it into a moral. The audition sheet was upstairs on Casey's desk, still blank, I knew that, and I left it blank. I left the truth on the counter next to the bad bowl, and I let it sit there. I'm going up, I said. There's leftovers if you want them. And I went to bed. But I lay there awake a long time because something had settled in me on that drive, and it wasn't done settling. I'd been a coward at the sink. I'd handed Nadia the easy answer when she reached for the true one. And lying there in the dark, I understood that the showcase wasn't a thing that was going to happen to me. It was a thing I was going to have to do. I was going to have to stand at that long table in the lobby, in the daylight, with a genuinely bad pot in front of me, and not apologize for it, and not make a joke to get ahead of it. I was going to have to do the one thing I'd spent my entire life arranging my life to avoid. Being seen failing, on purpose where everyone could watch. And worse than that, I was going to have to say the true thing to Nadia, the thing I'd swallowed at the sink, with no wheel to hide behind and no Tuesday to lean on and no Clay to talk about instead. Just me as myself, saying the thing out loud in a lobby. And I was going to have to do all of it, whether or not she even showed up. That was the part that kept me staring at the ceiling. She'd said she might skip it. I'd told her it was no big deal. For all I knew, she'd take me at my word and stay home, and I'd be standing there next to 2 bad pots worth of nothing, having finally found my courage about 11 days too late to matter. But somewhere around 2 in the morning I decided anyway. I'd bring the bad bowl. I'd bring Casey. I'd stand by my terrible pot and not flinch, and if she came I'd say the true thing in the daylight like a person instead of a function. I had no idea if any of it would work. The showcase was 6 days out, and the one thing I needed most to be true about it was the one thing I had absolutely no control over. I'd handed her an exit and told her to take it. Now all I could do was show up, stand by the worst pot on the table, and hope she didn't believe me. 6 days went the way the bad days don't, fast. Then it was Tuesday again, the last one, and I was standing in the rec center lobby at 6:55 with a bowl in my hands. The long table was already set up. Somebody had put out a paper cloth and a coffee urn and a tray of grocery store cookies, and the pieces were starting to land on it, one by one, as the 20-somethings drifted in and set down what 8 weeks had made of them. They were good. Genuinely, casually good. Clean bowls that sat flat, a tall vase glazed like a storm coming in. Marco had a teapot, an actual teapot with a lid that fit and a spout that poured, and he set it down like it was nothing because to him it was. I stood at the end of the table and looked at my bowl. It was bad. There's no kind word that does the job, so I'll use the true one. The base wouldn't sit flat, so it rocked when you set it down, a slow wobble like a coin coming to rest. One wall thick, one wall thin. And up on the rim, right where your thumb would go if you picked it up, there was a dent, my dent. The thumbprint I'd pressed in by accident in week 3, and then, every week after, chosen not to fix. I'd thought about fixing it, all week. I'd sat with the bowl on my kitchen counter and thought, I could smooth that, I know how now. I could make it a little less obviously a mistake. I left it. Then I walked the bowl to the middle of the table, set it down in the gap between the storm vise and somebody's set of 4 perfect cups, and I let it wobble to a stop, and I stood next to it. That was the whole plan. I'm aware of how small it sounds. Set down the worst object in the room and stand by it. But I'd spent 37 years arranging my entire life, so I would never have to do that exact thing. And now I was doing it on purpose, in fluorescent light, by a coffee urn. I didn't apologize for it. That was the part I'd promised myself. No "oh, mine's the disaster," no little laugh to get out ahead of the judging, no joke handed to the room so they'd know I knew. I just put it down and stood there and let it be mine. The fixer wanted a script so badly. The fixer had 3 or 4 good lines ready, charming, self-deprecating, the kind that make people relax. I didn't use them. I let the bowl be bad in silence, with my name on the little card in front of it, and I felt the armor I'd worn my whole adult life slide off my shoulders and pool on the floor and stay there. Casey was watching me do it. That was the other thing. I'd asked, 2 nights before, standing in the kitchen doorway, trying to sound like it didn't matter. Showcase thing, Tuesday, the pottery class. You don't have to. And Casey had shrugged the way 15-year-olds shrug, which can mean anything, and then put on shoes. So now my kid was leaning against the lobby wall by the bulletin board, hands in hoodie pocket, watching their dad stand next to the single worst piece of pottery in a room full of people who could see it. I caught Casey's eye for a second. Casey looked at the bowl, then at me, then at the 4 perfect cups 8 inches from my disaster. And I watched my kid clock the whole thing without me saying one word about it. The dad who'd never been bad at anything was standing in public next to proof that he was, and he wasn't flinching, and he wasn't leaving, and the room had not ended. Casey didn't smile exactly, but something in the shoulders came down. The wall lean got a little less braced. I didn't say anything about courage. God knows I'd earned the right to a speech, and God knows I didn't give it. I just stood by my bowl and let Casey see me do it. That was the only sermon I had in me, and it was the only one worth giving. 7 o'clock came. People milled. Priya made a little speech about how proud she was, how far everyone had come, and I half listened and watched the door. 5:10 passed, and the door stayed shut. And I felt it start to happen, the thing I'd been dreading on the drive home 6 nights running. The slow sinking certainty that she'd taken me at my word. It's no big deal, you'd barely notice I wasn't there. I'd handed her that exit with my own mouth, warm and reasonable and false, and now I was going to find out that honesty about a pot was a lot cheaper than honesty about a person. Casey drifted over, stood next to me at the table, looked at the bowl up close. "It really is bad," Casey said quietly. "Yeah. You're just going to stand here next to it." "That's the plan." Casey nodded slowly, like the plan had passed some kind of test. We stood there together, father and kid, and the worst bowl in the building. And then the lobby door opened. I knew before I turned. I don't know how. The air changed, or I just wanted it so hard I felt it. I turned, and there she was, coming in late and fast, cheeks pink from the cold, a little out of breath like she'd argued with herself in the parking lot and lost. Nadia. She was holding something against her chest with both hands, holding it the way you hold a thing you've already half decided to put back in the car. She came down the lobby toward the table and she wouldn't quite look at me, and I watched her scan the teapot and the storm vase and the perfect cups, and I watched her shoulders do the exact thing mine had done, the flinch. The old reflex that says don't, not here, not next to these. She got to the table. She stood across from me, and for a second I thought she might just stand there empty-handed and pretend she'd only come to watch. Then she looked at my bowl. She looked at it a long moment, the wobble, the thick wall and the thin wall, the thumbprint dent in the rim I hadn't fixed. Something went out of her shoulders. The brace came down, and she set her piece on the table, right next to mine, so close they were almost touching. It was Trevor. The squat lopsided mug she'd named weeks ago, the one she'd sworn up and down wasn't worth displaying, the handle sitting at a drunk angle no one would ever choose. She set Trevor down beside my bowl, two of the worst objects ever fired in that kiln, side by side in the middle of all that competence. And she looked up at me. I was already grinning. I couldn't help it. And she started grinning too, fighting it and losing, the way she fought the clay and lost. Then we were both just standing there over two terrible pots, grinning at each other like a pair of idiots, while the whole rest of the room had no idea what was funny. Because nobody else could see it. To everyone else, it was two bad pots a couple of beginners had been brave enough to display. They didn't know about the sink, the 11 years, the hands for nothing delicate. They didn't know what it cost her to walk that mug through that door. I knew. She knew I knew. That was the whole thing. You came, I said. Don't make it weird, she said. You brought Trevor. Trevor insisted. She wouldn't meet my eyes for that part. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes. I had the heat on and everything. I was fully going to leave. What changed your mind? She glanced at the two pots, then back at me. I figured if I was going to humiliate myself, I'd rather do it next to somebody worse. My bowl is objectively worse than Trevor. It really is. It's a comfort. And I laughed and she laughed, and then it got quiet between us in that big way it had started doing, even in a loud room. The way it does when you both know the next thing said is the one that matters. So I said it. No wheel to hide behind, no Tuesday to lean on, no clay to talk about instead. Just a lobby and a coffee urn and fluorescent light, and me as myself saying the thing I'd swallowed at the sink the week before. I need to tell you something, I said, and there's no good way to do it that isn't just doing it. She went still. I told you, it was no big deal. I made myself hold her eyes. That was a lie. It was the biggest deal. I wanted you here so bad I couldn't see straight, and I told you the opposite, because that's the thing I do. I make it easy for people. I disappear so nobody has to deal with me wanting anything. Russ. Let me get it out, or I won't. She closed her mouth. I stopped coming for Diane weeks ago, you know that. But I want to say the rest of it. I took a breath. I started coming for you. The hour this room, you at the next wheel telling me not to breathe on it. That's what I was driving here for. Not the argument. You. The lobby kept moving around us. Somebody refilled the coffee. Marco laughed at something across the room. And I don't want this to be a Studio B thing, I said. A thing that only existed in here, on Tuesdays, with the clay doing all the talking. Because the class is over tonight. There's no more here, and I don't want there to be no more us. Her hand was resting on the table next to Trevor. I watched it, not her face. So I'm asking for something that lives out there, I said. In the daylight. Coffee, a real one, not the stuff out of that machine that tastes like a penny. Somewhere that isn't this building. Just you and me, no wheels, no aprons, nothing to do with our hands except hold a cup. Then Nadia looked down at the two pots, and back up at me, and she said it the way real people say it, dry, sideways. Trying to keep her face from giving the whole thing away and failing at the corners of her mouth. You want to take me out, she said, for coffee that doesn't taste like a penny. That's the pitch. Like an adult, with no clay involved. Then, I'll keep my hands in my pockets the whole time if it helps. It won't. She pressed her lips together, the grin winning. Okay, yes, God yes. She rolled her eyes at herself, at me, at the whole thing. Saturday, there's a place on Fulton that doesn't have a single piece of pottery in it, which after 8 weeks of this I find deeply attractive. Saturday. Bring nothing, make nothing, fix nothing. She pointed a finger at me, and her voice went a little softer under the dry. I mean it. You don't have to be useful at me, just show up. I can do that. We'll see, but she was still smiling. She reached into her bag then, and pulled out the travel mug, the chipped one that had lived on her workbench all 8 weeks like it owned the spot, the bite out of the rim by the handle. This is coming, she said. It's the only one of mine that isn't an embarrassment, and even it's chipped. So you know what you're getting into. I've known what I was getting into since week 1. No, you didn't. No, I admitted, I really didn't. And that was the whole grand romance, if you want to call it that. 2 middle-aged people and 3 ugly pots and a chipped mug, making a plan to drink coffee on a Saturday in a building with no kiln. No music swelled. Priya started taking the cookie tray down. Somebody's kid knocked over a cup, the good kind, and it didn't even break, which felt unfair to my bowl. But we'd done the thing. We'd taken the one good thing we had and lifted it off the wheel and decided to carry it ourselves out the door into a week that had no Studio B in it, no scaffolding. Just us, agreeing to find out if we held our shape once the spinning stopped. A few days later, I came home from work, and the house wasn't quiet. Somebody was singing upstairs. It was Casey. The shower wasn't running. That was the first thing I noticed. No water. Just my kid's voice coming down the stairs, clear and a little unsure and then less unsure, working through the same 8 bars over and over, the way you do when you're learning a thing instead of hiding it. I stood there a second, keys still in my hand, and I waited for it. The thing that always happened. The door closing, the voice cutting off mid-note, the kid going silent the instant a parent's foot hit the stair. I went up. I made noise on purpose, the way you do so you don't catch someone. Dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, loud. Casey kept singing. Didn't stop, didn't slam the door. Just kept going, working the 8 bars, with the door open and their dad 3 feet away in the hall. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask about the audition or the sign-up sheet, because I could hear they'd done it. And the asking would have closed the door I'd spent 8 weeks learning to leave open. I just changed out of my work clothes, while my kid sang in the next room like it was nothing. Like being heard was a thing a person could risk. The sheet on the desk wasn't blank anymore. I saw it later, in passing, not looking. A name signed at the bottom. I didn't make it a moment. The kid tried out for the thing. The door was open. I still have the bowl. It's on a shelf in my kitchen, the bad one. The one I stood next to in that lobby. It still wobbles when you set it down. The dent is still in the rim. I never did fix it. I could now, easily. I've gotten a little better, but it would be like editing a letter you already meant. So it just sits there, lopsided and dented and useless for anything you'd actually want a bowl for. It's the most honest thing I own. I never won the argument with Diane. That's the part I sat with, after. I'd signed up to prove a dead point to a woman to win a fight that ended in a quiet kitchen a year before with her saying she didn't know who I was anymore. And the strange thing is that somewhere around week 3, the argument just stopped mattering. And I stopped noticing it had stopped. She'd just been the excuse I needed to finally go be bad at something on a Tuesday night. The argument was never the point. It was just the door I walked through to get to the rest of it. Nadia's travel mug lives in my cabinet half the week now, the chipped one. Trevor sits on the windowsill, drunk handle and all, holding pens. Gerald didn't survive a move, which we both mourned more than was reasonable. My bad bowl and her bad mug ended up on the same shelf eventually, which neither of us planned and neither of us mentioned. Two lopsided things nobody else would keep, sitting next to each other in the daylight. So that's the story. A pottery class I took to spite a ghost, and the worst student in the room who turned out to be the only person who could see me clearly. I'll leave you with a question, because I've been sitting with it ever since. What's the thing you keep telling yourself you'd just be bad at? The class you never signed up for, the song you only sing with the door shut, the shelved one you filed away years ago because somebody laughed once, or because you were afraid that somebody might be right. I'd love to know. Tell me down in the comments the thing you talked yourself out of being a beginner at. And if any of this landed, there are more stories like it here on the channel. Thanks for staying till the end.